Before we start this video, I just want to make a really cool announcement. As some of you might know, the latest Avengers game is coming out, and for the first time on the channel I will be streaming live as I play the game. The game itself is looking really good right now, and I would love to be able to share the experience of playing with all of you. The release date for the game is 4th of September, but amazingly we're going to be able to play it 3 days earlier on the 1st. We're going to be streaming at 5 PM GMT. During the stream I will also be doing an AMA just so I can connect with you all and hopefully answer some of your questions. It should be a good time and I'd love for you to join along, so get subscribed if you haven't already to get notified about that stream as well as plenty more content in the future. Anyways, enough plugging, time to get into the video. Over the last few months on this channel, I have been reviewing the first few Marvel movies in the MCU. All of them you can check out after this video, and sure, some of them were really good, but there were a few that didn't quite end up hitting the mark. However, all these films were actually just a preview of what Marvel was wanting to achieve. The whole time Marvel had a much bigger plan that they were setting up, which we would end up knowing as the Avengers. Heralded by Joss Whedon, this film had the impossible job of bringing together 4 years and 5 films worth of characters and plot points into one cohesive, entertaining movie. Most people beforehand looked at the concept and immediately thought that it was a bad idea. Boy, how wrong they were. Thanks to the humongous success of this film, Marvel ended up being able to pave the way for a brand new era in cinema, known as the cinematic universe. Sure, in the past we've seen cinema go through several different forms and trends, but never before had a studio decided to have individual movies within one universe, and then have them all come together for one huge blockbuster event. Sure, it had been done several times in the comics, but this was absolutely groundbreaking in terms of cinema, and over time we've seen other companies try to replicate this formula, and yet not succeed in the way that we see Marvel did. And so in this review I'm going to be looking back at how Marvel not only created a franchise, but ended up changing cinema in the process. So where else should we start this review than by looking right at the beginning. When looking at this movie, the huge success of it could definitely be thanks to the fact that there were 5 films leading up to it. This allowed Marvel to introduce and flesh out the characters and universe that they were living in before coming into this movie. However, the film needed to find a way to naturally bring back all of these characters, filling in the gaps between the previous films and this one. We first get reintroduced to Nick Fury, Phil Coulson and Hawkeye all hanging out in the SHIELD base, before finding out that the Tesseract is misbehaving. A few minutes later we see the Tesseract creating a portal for someone travelling through, which we soon realise is Loki, our main villain. As I mentioned in my review on Thor, Loki at this point in time was the best villain in the MCU, so bringing him back to be the main villain in this movie is a genius move. Once Loki arrives at the SHIELD base, the first thing we see him do is mind control Erik Selvig and Hawkeye. Quick side note here, why on earth did Marvel make one of the core members of the Avengers a bad guy for the majority of this movie? He first of all doesn't get much screen time in Thor, and then when we actually see him in this movie, we're rooting against him for the majority of the time. I get for fans of the comics they understand who this character is, but for the people who have only watched the movies, this doesn't really make sense. And so it is understandable that people didn't really like Hawkeye after seeing this movie. Thankfully, they ended up improving on his character much more down the line, but it is still pretty poor that they couldn't do that in this movie. Anyways, with Hawkeye and Selvig under Loki's control, they end up retrieving the Tesseract and escaping the SHIELD base, leaving it in ruins. In these first few moments we are immediately shown our Avengers level threat needed to bring all these characters together. It's great that we're already seeing this conflict straight away, as it means we should be able to see the Avengers spend more time with each other. However, we still have to watch 30 more minutes of them setting up these Avengers before getting to see them come together. Now this would be great and all if each character had different arcs that were being worked upon in this film. However, as I was watching, I really didn't see that being worked on in this movie, and it really does let it down after we've seen films like Infinity War and Endgame, which works on character arcs really well. And so since there are no arcs really being worked on, it does feel weird that we are seeing 30 minutes of introducing characters in some of the weirdest ways possible. Like, what does this mission with Black Widow have anything to do with the movie, or anything in the future of the franchise? Sure, when we are introduced to Hulk, Captain America and Iron Man, it is under the pretense that they are being asked to join as part of the team, but it really feels like that they were trying to grow each character individually first, and I thought their origin movies were supposed to do that. After seeing these recruitment scenes, we start to get our first real action in the movie, as we see Loki and Hawkeye work together to steal some thingamabobs for Selvig. This segment shows off our first Avenger in action. Get it? First Avenger? Okay. We see Cap face Loki one-on-one before Iron Man comes in and finishes the job. It's funny that the first interaction we see with these two is them barely acknowledging each other, allowing us to believe their tension later on in this movie. With Loki captured, they take him back to the S.H.I.E.L.D. base, but there's still one Avenger that hasn't yet been introduced. Yep, that's right, Thor. Thor gets introduced in a somewhat weird way, as we see him break onto their ship to steal Loki away from them, and so Iron Man and Cap follow suit in order to get Loki back. Thor and Loki end up having a brief discussion with each other, bridging the gap between Thor's movie and this movie. However, bridging might not be the right word. Do you remember this happening in Thor? And do you remember how that was a huge deal? Yeah, well, they end up explaining that away entirely with this one line.
With the Bifrost gone, how much dark energy did the Allfather have to muster to conjure you here?
This in itself just shows how hard it was for Whedon to create this movie. It was like he had to create a very generic script and change anything if the movies beforehand had anything that contradicted them. Anyways, Iron Man decides to battle Thor as he lets his ego get the better of him. This fight between two of our main characters is not only a great spectacle, but in a way lays the foundation for what was to come with our heroes later on. After a while in this fight, Cap arrives and asks Thor to put the hammer down, with which Thor replies,
"You want me to put the hammer down?"
With Thor accepting this stalemate, we end our first act. With all of the introductions now out of the way, it was finally time to get what we all paid for, seeing these heroes together, and what an entertaining ride it was going to be. With the introductions of all our main characters now out of the way, it was time to see how they would all interact with one another. We first see that Tony Stark and Bruce Banner end up working really well with each other, even though it does seem that Tony wants Bruce to Hulk out. Despite of this, we do see a great few scenes with these two, especially the talk they have together about the Hulk. Now the obvious similarity with these two characters is that they are both superheroes because of an accident, and originally not by choice. Stark has come to accept that, taking on the persona of Iron Man at the end of his first movie. But Bruce still hasn't accepted that. And so seeing Tony explain to Bruce that the Hulk inside might have a greater purpose, we hear Banner reply,
"So you're saying that the Hulk saved my life? That's nice. It's a nice sentiment. Saved it for what?"
I guess we'll find out.
Later on in the film, we see these lines come into fruition, as the Hulk ends up playing an important part in the fight against the Chitauri. But when you end up looking forward even further into the MCU, we see this line is still important, especially in Endgame.
It's like, I was made for this.
And so something the film does really well is not only set up moments that have an immediate payoff in this movie, but they also end up becoming moments that have an even greater payoff down the line. One great example of this is the small argument between Iron Man and Captain America. The first few interactions they have with each other show us how easy it could be for both of them to clash heads, which is something we see further down the line in the future of the MCU. We also end up hearing some very interesting lines from both Cap and Iron Man.
The only thing you really fight for is yourself. You're not the guy to make the sacrifice play.
You're a laboratory experiment, Rogers. Everything special about you came out of a bottle.
But not only do these lines end up being proven wrong within this movie, but even further down the line once again in Endgame.
The only thing you really fight for is yourself. You're not the guy to make the sacrifice play.
You're a laboratory experiment, Rogers. Everything special about you came out of a bottle.
And so, as expected, some of the best moments in the film is when we see our heroes come together. But as Bruce ends up saying later on,
I mean, what are we, a team? No. We're a chemical mixture that makes chaos. We're a time bomb.
and this is all part of Loki's plan. Loki knows that these individual superheroes would find it hard to ever work with one another, and he knew that in the end they themselves would be their greatest downfall, thus showing us how this group of individuals were not yet a team. And so when mind-controlled Hawkeye comes to infiltrate the holocarrier, our heroes are not in the best state of mind. We do get to see a few characters work together, but with the Hulk now added into the mix, no one is safe.
Run.
What a shot this is, by the way. Oh, and also another quick side note, Hulk looks so much better here than in his origin movie. Not sure what they did, but it looks so good throughout. Anyways, after Hulk goes toe to toe with Thor for a while, a ship tries to shoot down Hulk, but the green beast just shakes it off and runs at the ship, taking the Hulk out of the picture. This allows Thor to go check on Loki, who ends up tricking him into his prison.
You stupid!
We then see Hawkeye and Black Widow having an intense fight, even though we know there's a good history between the two. Thankfully, Deus Ex Machina comes into play as Hawkeye ends up hitting his head really hard and gaining back his consciousness. These series of events just shows us how separated these characters really are, not being able to work together, but rather fighting by themselves or even against each other. And so with this mess of a team, it is not that shocking that we see Loki succeed in escaping. And it would take something massive in order for this team to finally come together.
That'll do. Loki.
That'll do.
With the team really not being able to merge the way that we anticipated, it made the audience wonder what would have to change in order for these heroes to actually work together. But the answer to that question was staring at us right in the face: the Avengers. Why were they called the Avengers when they didn't originally have anything to avenge? And so it is only when we see Coulson die that the Avengers name now has real meaning, and this ends up hitting home hard for our heroes. They realised that if they weren't bickering and was able to work with one another, that they could have prevented this from happening. But it was all because of their egos and personalities that got in the way. And so after a brilliant pep talk from Fury and a few words with each other, it was time to get into our final showdown. This time with our heroes willing to work together to save the day. And so we can now start diving into probably one of the best final showdowns ever in a Marvel movie: the Battle of New York. With some of our heroes still scattered, we see Loki's plans of starting a war on Earth begin to take shape as the Tesseract opens a portal for his Chitauri army to follow through. As more Avengers start to come into the picture, we see each of them first begin to protect the civilians in the area. But it is when our final Avenger arrives on the scene that things start to get really exciting, because they're now a team. They are the Avengers, and nothing shows that more clearly than this iconic scene. I have watched this scene at least over 15 times, and it still gives me goosebumps.
Is it too good?
Seeing all our heroes finally together with Alan Silvestri's outstanding score booming throughout is just fabulous to watch. This was the moment where the unbelievers would finally accept the fact that having a cinematic universe not only worked, but could end up creating some of the most iconic moments in the history of cinema. Anyways, enough fangirling. With our Avengers now together, we get treated to a huge portion of action with our heroes fighting Loki's army. We see moments where heroes help each other and sometimes hurt each other. We also get to see our heroes have some amazing moments individually, and we even get to see one of the funniest scenes in the MCU.
I am a god, you dull creature, and I will not be bullied by that. Puny god.
And so, after being treated to scene after scene of fantastic action, dialogue, and iconic moments, the film ends up having a pretty weird, jarring moment. After the government finds out about New York, you'd expect them to send in their best men to help the Avengers out. But what ends up being their solution?
Order a nuclear strike against the civilian population.
What a ridiculously stupid thing to do. This would never actually happen, but the only reason it does is because it makes sense for the story. So with Iron Man hearing the news of this missile, he decides that there is only one way that this could go well, and that's by sending it through the portal into space. The fact that Black Widow is now also able to close the portal does make things pretty convenient, but as I said already, these moments are pretty jarring. And so Iron Man knowingly decides to make the sacrifice play, disproving Cap's words earlier in this movie. After Tony ends up blowing up the Chitauri ship in a style befitting to the Phantom Menace, a film you never want to be compared to, we see all the Chitauri end up powering down for some reason. Like, they're clearly not robots, so why have they all just fallen over? Oh yeah, plot convenience. Anyways, with the Deus being ex machina'd, we are still on the edge of our seats as Tony could still fall back through the portal, and luckily by the skin of his teeth, he manages to squeeze through, and with a little help from the Hulk,
hear the roar.
Tony wakes up with the other Avengers around playing a part in saving the day. And that's it. In the final scene, we end up seeing the Avengers all going their separate ways, but having formed a connection. They were now a team, and a team not to be reckoned with. As we hear from old Six Fingers himself,
To challenge them is to court death.
and with that end credit scene teasing more to come in the future, we cut to the credits, already feeling satisfied with the fantastic film we had just had the privilege to witness. And with Marvel finally completing their goal, this one film did something no film had ever done, and ended up changing cinema in the process. And luckily for us, this was only the beginning. So how would I rate this movie? As I've mentioned in this review already, this film was groundbreaking to say the least. It had defied expectations, silenced all the critics, and amazed everyone that went to see it. Sure, it's not as polished as it could possibly be, and we do end up seeing future Marvel movies outshine this one, but the fact that those films are even around is all thanks to the brilliance of this one movie. A movie that brought several franchises and several talented actors together, all to defeat one of the greatest Marvel villains of all time. Sure, there is a nostalgic feel to this film that does make us look past some of the mistakes, but when it comes down to it, this film knocked it out of the park. And so, taking that all into consideration, I'm going to give The Avengers a very impressive 9 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed listening to my thoughts on this brilliant movie. If you did like this video, it would be amazing if you could hit that like button down below. And if you want to see more videos on huge pop culture movies and TV shows, then subscribe to the channel as more Marvel reviews are coming soon. Also, don't forget that I'll be streaming in a couple of days, so make sure you're subscribed to get notified for that. Anyways, looking on to our next video, we're going to see if these mutants ended up being worth the wait. Hopefully, I'll see you then. Have an amazing day, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Bye!